it's been mentioned in many circles, and we just wanted to be sure and, oh.
The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Okay. I'm sorry, everybody. Yes, we're going to go through this again. We are here today with Bob Ulenka, Carmela Ramirez, and Jan Roeser from the Idaho Department of Labor for today's virtual roundtable. Yes, so if you have any questions, please type them in as you go, and we will try and cover them as they come up. And with that, I'll hand it over to Jan.
Hi there. I'm very happy to be here in front of you virtually, and hopefully we can kind of unearth some of the questions you might have regarding the Workforce Development Training Fund. It has gone through an overhaul. There's been lots of rumors. There's been lots of false starts with various projects. There's been lots of success stories as well. So what we'd like to do is just kind of go over it in a little bit more depth. Director Ken Edmonds would like everyone to get to a point in which they are very comfortable going through the scoring process if they want to, but we also want to send out a voting button to you eventually and see if that's something you'd like to do. So anyway, just to get started, we also have Bob Ulenka, our labor market guru that we brought along, and also Carmela Ramirez, who is administering a good part of the program. She'll be looking at everything from receipts that come in for the training program. But, you know, that's the crux of it, is basically this is no longer an incentive. It is a training program. A little history is just that in the past, Idaho hasn't had much of an incentive program. And it was basically approved in a lump sum, and it was given to a company, and how they got the reimbursement was kind of up to them. There wasn't a lot of oversight, and that was intentional. It really, truly was one of our few incentives, and it was funded by the SUTA monies that are collected, the unemployment insurance premiums that we collect on a quarterly basis. So going on to the next screen, things that changed that along the way are we did an internal audit of a report. It focused a lot of media attention on some of the information that was out there. Some of the companies did not stay as long as we had hoped, and that drew a lot of attention and a lot of criticism. We have a new director coming in, Ken Edmonds, and he has wanted to see a design shift. He totally believes that we need to develop the skills of our workforce to meet some of the challenges of the future, and so we're really excited to see it shift to that, quite frankly, and to see some results for our workers and consequently grow and augment the wage structure that we have in place right now. So along with that, it was basically kind of a two-pronged. You know, a lot of you were involved in creating the Idaho Tax Reimbursement Incentive. I understand there's an acronym, as with all state governments. Now it's TRI. Somebody asked yesterday, what's TRI? So now we know it's Tax Reimbursement Incentive. And so that helped move this program away from being an incentive towards being a true training program that has a lot more oversight, and there has to be a demonstrated training curriculum in place. And so we want just to continue to make sure everybody gets that shift and kind of follows that direction. We do have a process in place. We're tweaking it. We want it to be transparent. That's why we're here. We want you to be able to understand it. We want you to feel free to call. Ken will accept calls as well. I'm going to volunteer him like that. I'm sure he'll appreciate it. But, you know, he does feel really strongly that this is a positive thing. And so it continues to be funded by the same source. It comes out of the other employers that are paying into unemployment insurance taxes, and it's enhancing the skill level across the board, across the state of Idaho. So it's a good thing. The requirements are still fairly similar to what was there before. You still have to have a minimum of $12 for each position. You can't do an average of all the positions that are out there. You still have to have the employer subsidized health insurance benefits. There still has to be 50% of the product exported out of the region. They have to be a registered company in the state of Idaho with insurance premiums paid on those trained workers. They can't be in another state being trained, eventually moving to Idaho. They actually have to be in Idaho. These are some of the little quirky things that we've ran across, and so we want to communicate those out there. Company size is still flexible. You know, we're promoting small companies, large companies. Job creation should be, you know, a little bit bigger than one position. So that's why greater than 5 is on there. The quantitative analysis has been developed that we're going to go over, not in as much detail. Possibly Amanda will provide us the forum down the road in which to give a little bit more technical training, but we're going to give you a pretty broad brush stroke look at it, and it really focuses on wages and the detailed training per position, and it's not focusing necessarily on how much money per position, but how much of a detailed curriculum with trainers that are not just internal employees. There actually is a curriculum. Hopefully there's a credential at the end. If there's not a credential, then there should be skills that are transferable. We're looking at occupations, and you know, there's quantitative data to support all of this. So we were happy to have Bob put together this scoring model, and so that's kind of what we're going into now with not this screen, but the next. Sorry about this. That took a little longer than expected. You know, just to show you the process, we will look at a quantitative analysis preliminarily. You know, but at some point in time, we have to have more details, and we have to have that training information. We have to have the number of positions. We have to have the wages. So that's the first step to really going towards a commitment letter in which the director reviews it and actually makes a decision. And then at some point, of course, the training's implemented. And then they ask for the reimbursement request, and the training is verified. So this is just a real simplistic view of that. Oh, come on. That pot of gold is just bouncing around out there. So the scoring model is here. You know, it has once again gone through some renditions. Jenny was in on the very beginning stages of it. She may have even seen, you know, some of these graphics, but it has continued to change, and it is a living document. It's, you know, it very well could change along the way a little bit more. So always check with us if you're wanting to preliminarily run your numbers. However, you know, there's at least one category that have confidential premium information, kind of the employer's experience rating. Unless they give that to you, we can't divulge it. It's a very small component. Bob's going to go into that, but you know, we think this is a pretty good method of determining whether a company really should receive those funds versus maybe another company that has less training or lower wages. So I'm going to hand the baton over to Bob.
I'll start with from right to left. Is it Chinese that you read right to left, or we're going to do some Chinese today, make it a little more fun. The reason is that the columns to the right aren't as important. They gain in importance as you go left in a way that differs with metric 5. So we'll start with metric 5 on the right. And the blue numbers, well, we'll talk in general broad terms first. The blue numbers at the bottom are the total numbers for that whole category, that whole metric, and they add up. You see the blue numbers from the left to the right at the bottom there. And right now I have everything scored in there as 100, so that if you could get a maximum score, you'd score 10 in every single category, and the math would work its way across and get 100. There's probably not a company in the state of Idaho that would score 100. We kind of thought through that, and that's one reason the scale starts pretty low. But you know, conceivably, you know, you'll as we walk through, you'll see how a company could score 100. So we'll start with metric 5, and that's our location quotient. Actually, I notice I've taken location quotient out because that kind of gets complicated. But essentially, that means the concentration of that occupation in your state as compared to the rest of the country. Why this is important, why this wasn't a metric we chose to add, is often a company will come in the past have come in, received the training subsidy, and then left the state. And so often, if it leaves the person that received that training, if they're low on their, if an occupation that's low on this list, they would have not a very good chance to get another job with another business in their town. And so all this is essentially kind of the relative competitive advantage of that occupation to the state and to the nation. So one example would be if a company comes in and they're an oceanographer hiring a bunch of marine biologists. Well, a marine biologist would likely score near the bottom because there are not a lot of marine biologists in the state of Idaho. So they would score, maybe 1 point or 0.20. There might be some doing some aquaculture type stuff in Twin or something like that. But there aren't. And the logic is that if the company that hires them leaves, they still have opportunities in Idaho. And not only that, the companies that are left in Idaho that are paying this tax, which money is taken from this, they would then benefit from that training as well. So not just the company that maybe wasn't successful, that received a subsidy, the workforce then benefits, and then the likelihood of other companies in that area would benefit should that company leave. And so it's one of those deals where we wanted to benefit not only the new company, but ultimately if it didn't work out, we'd benefit the workforce as a whole. And again, the example for marine biologists would be near the bottom because there aren't that many. Now, if there was training in food processing, we have quite a bit of food processing in the state, so what will happen is those location quotients will be up a little higher. It'd be like 1.5 or something. So they'll receive quite a bit more, and then the logic is that they're very likely to be, if they're trained in process and food processing, maybe they're trained to work a programmable logic controller or something, and they're likely to be able to go across the street to the next guy should the business that hired them gone out of business. So that investment is good. So you receive more points if your occupations that you're training have the likelihood to be hired somewhere else in the state. And that's all that category is. The number one is the center. If an occupation comes in and it's coded, and you look up the location quotient, it's provided by the Bureau of Labor Statistics. You look it up, and it says it's a 1. That means that you roughly have the exact same ratio as the national average in your state. And so that's all that is. You go to the top and you see the weight there. It has a weight of 2, so it's kind of 20% of the score. You get a maximum if you have a location quotient of 3. You see up there the LQ right below there's a 2.5. That means you'd get 10 points because it's above 2.5. And you just take 10 in the orange box. You put it in 10 in the orange box, and it automatically multiplies by the weight to the right. Goes down to the bottom, 20 in total, so you get 20 points if you have a high location quotient. On average in this category, we find that the scores come in the 5, 6, 7, 8 range. There's a few that have been lower. But so that's essentially how this works for that metric 5. You move to metric 4, and you'll go right straight to the top and notice that it's not worth a whole lot. It's half of the weight, and so it's 5% of a total score if you were to get hundreds across the board. And then what this is the county unemployment rate. The first thing you'll notice, you'll look at those unemployment rates. They look pretty dang high. Right now, the state average is 4.5%, and so you say, well, we're always going to be 0. Well, the way this works is we have a spreadsheet that this goes back about a year and a half and uses the fiscal year from a year and a half ago. And then you say, well, why are we using old data? Well, we're also using the old county rates as well. And we'll recalibrate this every year. In January, we'll recalibrate this. This is really designed to give the rural folks an advantage because typically unemployment rates are higher, so the need is probably greater in rural areas. And it allows those folks with higher unemployment rates, so it puts the subsidy where the greatest need is in the state. But again, know that the county rates that are being applied to this are the county rates from a year and a half ago. The reason we use old unemployment rates is because unemployment rates are notorious for changing. We forecast the unemployment rate, and then we estimate it the next month, and then we benchmark it, and then maybe a year later we change them all again because there's a new modeling. That's going to be happening in here in the next little bit, or we're going back and changing unemployment rates maybe 5, 6 years ago because of new modeling, new information coming in. And so that's one reason we lock this into a year-old data, because that is at least benchmark data that's not likely to change. And of course, we use the relative unemployment rate of that county back in the same time period. So really, it's just a way to geographically allocate the points. And that's, again, not worth a whole lot. If you get into, a lot of the ones we're rating are coming in the 3, 4, 5 range. And so you get half of whatever 3, 4, or 5 is. So if you get a 4, it's 2. In this case, of course, I've got top scores in all of them. The next one in metric 3 is the unemployment insurance experience rate, and this is where Jan mentioned earlier that this is protected information. A business should certainly know their rate. So if you're coming into the state new, though, you would get the standard rate, which is right there flat in the middle, number 6. So you'd get 6 points, and you'd half of that be 3. If you're coming in and you're a very good rated employer, all those positive rate classes, positive 1, positive 2, all the way up to positive 7, those folks are folks that the benefits that are paid to their employees in unemployment benefits are less than the taxes that they've paid over the years. So really, they've paid more into the system than their employees have benefited. If you're at the bottom, that means that your employees have received more taxes or more benefits than you paid in taxes, and so that's why those bottom folks pay a higher tax rate. Roughly, folks will run into the 65% of all employers are up in that top category, positive. So people typically score in the top range up there, and 65% in the positive rate classes, and about 23% this last year in the standard rate. So that only leaves about 10 to 12% in the negative down there. So you're typically going to score a 6, 7, or 8 in that category. Why did we do this? Why did we take some points away? The thought process is here is, as Jan mentioned earlier, this program is funded by a 3% set aside basically off the unemployment insurance tax rate. So the folks on the bottom are already kind of, they're not gaming the system. Typically these folks are construction companies, and there's a reason for that. They want to, or they close a line down in the manufacturing sector. They want the employers to be able to go and be able to still feed their families when they lay them off for 2 weeks and not run off to Nevada and get another job. They want to retain that workforce. So the program is designed to help them out, and then they can come back to work 2 weeks later when the line gets open again or when the weather warms up in the case of construction. So that it's not that they're hurting the system. It's a benefit to our whole economy that they're not losing their workforce. That being said, those folks at the bottom are already kind of being subsidized by the unemployment insurance program. So in a way, if you're at the bottom there and you get workforce development training funds, you're kind of double dipping. That being said, I don't believe we scored any in the negative rating. So they're usually going to run up there near the top. We go to the next category.
Hold on just a second. We have a question. So Kathleen Sanborn, pardon me if is the transferability by county for the metric 5 and it's by state?
No, it's by the whole state.
Yeah.
Yeah, we do it by the whole state because we assume that the state, it's a state program, so you'll benefit if a company can somehow, if a company closes in southeastern Idaho and the person can move up to northern Idaho and get a job, and that company in northern Idaho benefit from the training already given, that's a good thing since it's a state program. Good question, though. The metric number 2 is worth 10%, so you see the weight of 1. So whatever you score in that category goes straight to the bottom. Is the industry economic multiplier, and we actually use EMSI. You can see down in the second to top box there, it says we use EMSI input-output multipliers for that. So if we know the industry NAICS code, the North American Industry Classification System number, we can go and find out what that multiplier is. Obviously, you want to invest in companies that are going to have a high economic impact into the area. Really kind of what determines this, we always say businesses that have, or industries that have a long and local supply chain. If they, dairies are always a good, or cheese manufacturing is one of my favorite examples because they typically purchase milk from the local area and process it, turn it to cheese, and then ship it across the world. And so it's a long and local supply chain and typically export-based that has a high multiplier. So a lot of manufacturing, timber-type industries at the top there get the highest multiplier. If you're just a retail outfit, a lot of time you're at the bottom because you're importing more things to sell, or you're importing things to sell in your state, and so you're not going to have a very good economic multiplier.
Low wages.
And low wages, and so you have high wages. Will add to that as well. So we just look up the NAICS code, use the multipliers provided by economic Modeling
Specialist
Inc.
International.
International, I think now, and they do a great job, and we use their multipliers to assess how many points to attribute to that category. So you can see that this one, if this were probably a cheese manufacturer, they would be up in the 3.5 range, and you get 10 points times 1 drops down to 10. You add that to the list. Now, the one to the left, metric 1, is really where all the weight is, and it's kind of really comes down to brass tacks of what really matters. The metric 2, 3, 4, and 5, on average so far, you can almost guarantee in those metrics that the application will score somewhere between the 18 and 22 range. And so I kind of, if someone were to ask what's the typical going to be in those categories, it's going to be about 18 to 20, and then everything else comes in the metric 1. So metric 1 is where the weight is. I know when Jenny worked in this before, education and training was separated all the way to the right in a separate category. We chose to combine these variables. It's kind of a regression technique. When you combine variables, it's kind of one of those deals where with one, you can't just score well in one because it sinks the other one. So you have to do well fairly well in both to get a good score. And this is really where an application can score high. You can see that wages, we still have the wages, I don't know, argue relatively low, from $12 to $19 an hour in the scale there, and it goes from 3 points to 10. So that's obviously, when you find out these are weighted average as well, so when an application comes in with 4 different occupations being trained, you have to weight those by the amount of, whichever has the most in there. And so just simple weighted average is what we use for that. And then you would multiply that by increases the workforce and the human capital of our economy to compete in the global economy. And so, and this is something that's different as well. Jenny will remember in the past that there was a weight that you multiplied the score times the weight. But we chose to make education the weight. And so this will still add up to 100 if you get all the way across. But for this, you just enter the wages, whatever the weighted average for the wages. So in this case, it would be $19 or more at the top. Put in a 10. And then the weight you input based on the categories of education and training below. You could see that if it were a 13-hour job for 4 and structured OJT, that's at number 2, that's 2 times 4, you would only get 8. And you remember the principal to the right that's roughly going to be about 20, that's 28. You wouldn't score very well. So you're going to need to be pretty high on one of those scales, either education, training, and wages. So this will only benefit those that are paying competitive wages and offering real solid training. So you see how they kind of leverage upon each other. It's going to take pretty good in both sides to get a pretty high score. I will mention, you look to the right, kind of a little traffic light up there. There's the scale. The red says less than 31 points. That's essentially going to mean, sorry.
You said 41, 41.
Oh, less than 41 points, yes, excuse me. It's probably not going to be funded because it's kind of there's really not a lot of economic impact, economic value to the workforce. 41 to 50 is, we call it appreciable growth. So there is economic growth, but probably should use some discretion and make sure they think it's valuable on not just a quantitative but a qualitative measure as well. 46 or points or greater, that's really adding economic value to the economy and also the workforce. And so, I think we'll go to the next scale that has the funding levels that are attributed to these scores. You can see here, you can see the appreciable in the kind of yellow, use caution, and it's only, you score 41 to 45, it would be a $2,000 per employee training subsidy. Maybe subsidy is not the right term, grant. And the strong economic growth, you can see there's various ranges there. From 46 to 60, with the growth is pretty strong, pretty valuable to the economy, and so of course the pay scale goes up to the right as well. And then the dark green is there's significant growth, which means it's probably going to be a real boon to the economy. And so this is just kind of to give the applicant an idea of kind of where they would qualify in these categories. Did I miss anything, Jan and Carmela?
No, I don't think so. I will say, let me actually, talking since Bob kind of opened the door to the education part of it, you know, we spoke with our regional business specialists and we tried to come up with some of the concepts that are out there. We thought about tech help and the assistance that they give. We thought maybe tech help would fall somewhere in the 4s. We think some of the industry certifications that you can get, like with the Lean, like the Sigma 6s and the ISO 9000. I have a hard time remembering all of them since I've never gone through any of those, but you know, those would fall under the industry and personnel certifications. The occupational licenses, we still feel like there's some strata here. You know, there's occupational licenses for hairdressers. There's ones for nurses. There's registered nurses, I should say, and so there's quite a bit of difference in wages and career ladders that you can move up on from those. So this might be the area that we would come back and do a little bit more fine-tuning on. Even looking at the apprenticeships, I mean, there's a series of lower-level apprenticeships out there versus 4-year plumbing and electrical apprenticeships, which seem to be more highly employed over the long run type of apprenticeships and more highly paid. So, you know, I think we might end up down the road doing a little bit more differentiation there. I don't know. Would you like to add to that, Carmela?
No, you're doing fine. Go right ahead.
Well, I think also you guys looked at making sure it aligned well with the existing Workforce Information Act and then the future Workforce
Correct.
Innovation Opportunity Act, which will occur in July officially, I believe. And so those are better aligned. Those education categories are better aligned with the Workforce Information Act, which we work under.
Okay, some of the questions. Bob didn't bring his glasses, so if he ever says like a number wrong, that's why. So I'm going to read the questions, and we can all chime in. But the first question is, the wage of $12 per hour is actually high in rural areas such as Clearwater County. This issue has been mentioned in the past, has it been addressed? And, you know, I have a response, but I think Bob probably does too.
Yeah, it's a really good point. And we've even looked at trying to make it lower, you know, somehow maybe like almost like an inflation adjusted or cost of living adjustment. That was a different approach was chosen, and that's one reason the county unemployment rate. Usually those lower paying average pay occur in counties, rural counties, and so that's where metric 4 kind of adjusts for that. You know, I would argue that it does. You know, half of the weight is probably not as much as it would be if you adjusted it in the wage category itself. But it does. That was one of the designs, is that to somehow benefit the rural area in that way, because those rural areas typically, it's probably really highly positive correlated that the higher the counties with the higher pay likely have lower unemployment rates, so they wouldn't score as well in that other category. So it's, you know, that's how that was handled.
Yeah, and I would add that, you know, we have a hard time justifying using money for wages that from a statewide perspective don't appear to be very high, not even covering living. It's not considered, like $10 really isn't considered a living wage for even the rural areas. I mean, it's hard to get by if you're a single person on $10 an hour. So, you know, we're thinking about the fact that we're kind of taking this out of what employers have contributed, so they have to go towards pretty decent jobs. And anyway, that's just kind of augment that. Does that, hopefully that answers your question. You can always give us a call and talk about it some more. And, you know, certainly bend your legislators' ear or Ken's, you know, we like to push Ken forward. Will you be sharing the slides with those on the call? Absolutely. We'll be doing that. Can we give a copy of this presentation even to companies you're working with? Absolutely. This is as transparent as it can get. We're trying to get the information out there so people know what they're dealing with. And you're welcome.
Probably in sharing the slides, we probably, I'm just thinking in the document that we have that we do share on this, it's kind of a summary, it's a one page. I probably should do a better job of not caveating, but articulating on this document that the unemployment rate, because they'll look at their county unemployment rate and see does it match up. Because really, what those unemployment rates, you would take your county's fiscal average from July 2012 to June 2013 is what that.
It's an annual average.
The annual average. So you'd have to kind of either look in some of our labor market information to see what that annual average was on that fiscal year. Again, a year and a half back. But again, we've kind of studied the unemployment. It comes out of our shop, the unemployment rates, and really the counties don't shift positions at all. I mean, it's back in 2005, the counties with high unemployment rates were pretty much the same as the counties today in 2014. So again, that's just a geographical shifting, and so it's we'll probably should articulate that a little better in this document.
Yeah.
I just thought about that. Actually, in one of those lower boxes, say this is. I see it says anchored to the state fiscal year average state unemployment rate, but we should probably actually put the dates in there as well.
Mm-hmm. So people understand it. And if this were to be provided to everybody to use, if that's the consensus that people want to do that, we would be providing all of this information, the BLS location quotients. We'd be providing a list of the county rates. We'd be providing the multipliers for the different industries. What gets tough, and this is what we think would be hard because we struggle with it too. These applications, you'll get a job description, but it may not correspond directly with a standard occupational code. And so you kind of have to play around with ONET. You kind of have to get a pretty detailed job description before you can figure out where those standard occupational codes are. And that's what determines those location quotients. They are a weighted average, same as wages. It's not just not a regular average. It's a weighted average. So anyway, it gets a little complicated. It's not rocket science, but it just takes a little time. So we just want to know the consensus of whether you just want to give us a call and say, can you preliminarily give us a figure? But we just want to be sure that when we do that, you know it's preliminary. You remember that's communicated, because sometimes, it runs away. So, we've already touched on a lot of this in detail, but it's just kind of a little synopsis that it is the weighted average, and it's only, in the past, we've gotten a list of all, like for instance, a new company that's coming to, let's say, Boise, and they list all 20 positions that they're going to start with. And they might include the general manager. They might include the HR manager, the comptroller, and they'll include them for training. Well, our comment is, well, these people were hired for their credentials. They're hired knowing they can do the job. The training really isn't for that type of high-level position like that, unless it's, it's unusual. And so in the past, they've just kind of flooded that, and then that can raise your weighted average wage, and it's really for the individuals that are getting higher skill level training. So, and they do have to have the medical benefits, just like to make sure it's still the $12 hourly. The multiplier Bob mentioned is influenced by higher wages, the extensive supply chains, the raw materials produced within the region and then shipped out. 10%. I think a lot of this is kind of interesting, and I think Bob could talk about this. I think it's interesting. I kind of like numbers. You can send me a message saying, get out of the weeds if you think this is too detailed. But, this is an idea. Since you don't have their premium, their experience rating, this gives you an idea of where these industries fall as far as whether they're positively, negatively rated. And then, once again, the standard rate isn't in place for 3 years after a new employer comes on our rolls. So you can see that on manufacturing, the majority it's almost 60% are positively rated. So even though they may have some seasonality, they may have some layoffs for maintenance, it hasn't put them into a negative rating situation as a whole. Same wholesale. That's, these are the 5 that I noticed with our applications that are the most common industries that are popping up. So wholesale is another one that's very strong. It's pretty stable workforce. Professional, scientific, and technical services. That one does have the call centers, and so that's probably what might pull it down a little bit to 71. But this is a lot of engineers, it's a lot of research scientists. So I think it's kind of interesting to see. And then the call centers are under administrative support and waste management. So they do have the lower positive rating, 53%. Pardon me. So then healthcare and social assistance is another one that we encounter more rarely, but they're very stable. So you can kind of see that you could choose one of the positive rated for the majority of these applications or the standard rate and feel pretty comfortable that you're kind of in the middle.
Yeah, for that most of them score, well, of course the
high.
standard would be, obviously to be 6, but you can put most of them at the number 7. You have existing companies that have a rating. You probably give them a 7 or an 8. Would be kind of a safe guess if you don't know that rating. Yeah, timber, logging, construction, and mining typically make up a lot of the negative rated because they really use that to try to keep their during the winters, if you will, or off season, to keep their employees, keep the food on the table so they're willing to come back when they're ready to start up again.
Yeah, and they have skills. They want those skills back. Especially in mining and construction. Unemployment rate, that's just not very strong. That kind of goes into detail. And this is for those individuals that maybe get this later. We just want you to have it since you haven't heard the discussion as much. The location quotient, that kind of gives you an idea of the ratio that you use. If there's 100 jobs out of 1,000, and it's the same ratio nationally, you'd be at 1. Anything higher means we have a higher concentration. Anyway, and then this is the link so that you can go to the website, and we have that pulled up down there, don't we? Somewhere. Yeah. There it is. So it looks like that. It gives you a little bit more, information, maybe some different information, but some frequently asked questions. And we just hope that can kind of give everybody an idea of where this has moved to and how important it is to remember that it's for training purposes. So if you're getting preliminary information, and you really don't have a good idea of how many positions, how much wage, maybe you just have a project name and you may not even have a 6-digit industry which you need for a multiplier. Maybe just telling them that the program's out there and giving them the brochure is the best way to go about it, because you really can't get a score if it's just, so nebulous still, if it's still in that early stages. And so anyway, we have a group in here if they have any questions too. Other than that, I think we might be closing out a little early. Carmela?
You want to click on who to contact for help?
Yeah.
Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us. In case you do have any questions, we are highly recommending that you contact our regional business specialists throughout the entire state of Idaho and the 6 different regions that we have. And so in North Idaho, you can contact Risha Lasso. North Central Idaho, Sage Stoddard. In Southwest Idaho, because we cover such a wide range, it's Jose de Leon, Pina Den, Jose Morales. And in our South Central office, it's areas is Brent Tolman, and then in southeastern Idaho, Candy Rudd. And don't hesitate to contact me. On eastern Idaho, Megan Meyer. And please don't hesitate to contact me if you have questions or anything that you might be in regards to the application or pre-application process. The regional business specialists are your best source because they can work with you directly, not only with the specific positions and the standard occupational codes, but also with your training partners in your areas that's going to be focusing on higher points when you do the application for the training and the wages.
And Carmela handles the applications, and so we're just giving you an idea of kind of what's involved
And I'll walk you right through that. So,
and Randy's leaving us. He doesn't want to hear about that.
yeah, he just went through.
Can everybody else? Bye, Randy.
We still require the company information, some basic information on that. Most of those of you that are in the economic development and cannot provide the company information either because you're working with a site selector and the company does not want to reveal their names, then we just ask for a project name. Most of you are familiar with that. So you probably won't be able to provide us a federal tax ID number or anything of that sort. But we do need to go ahead and have the main contact information, and it might be the individual that's working with us temporarily. So if it's somebody from Commerce or somebody from Napa Economic Development, that would be the contact person. And then just describing the company's business, including the type of product and services they provide, what are the employee benefits the company provides, when was the company founded. And it's basically a lot of the information that most of you are used to working with that. And then what is driving your business expansion? That's really critical to find out what is going on, what's happening with that. The proposed number of positions, that's nothing different than what you've done in the past. So providing the position title, the number of positions, the starting wage, wage after training, and time expected that the wage will change. We're definitely looking to make a positive impact on economic stimulus with that. Then the proposed training by position, you get this scroll bar way over here. The position title, the number of positions that are being provided, the job description. And that's one of the things that you'll see that we have these little boxes there to kind of give you some information as to what describe the duties the employee will be performing. That is different than what type of skills the employee will be attaining. So the title of the training that will be provided, the specific skills gained by that, if it's going to have some type of credential or certification, and that has also the identifiers and definitions on those as well. If you have the vendor name, that's great. If you don't, at the pre-app process, to try and get a commitment letter or to try and get the business to work here with Idaho and as a moving or creating economic stimulus, then that's understandable if you don't have that training information from the vendors. And then the internal training, it's going to be more descriptive in regards to either the apprenticeship, which is going to be a collaboration of training and on the job training on that, versus the structured on the job training. That the company has a specific training provider and or they have a train the trainer certified person, that it's not just a checklist of here you go, follow me around, I'm going to check this off, but rather the director wants us to have a curriculum from that company that's providing the internal structured training.
I know that they need, you ideally want to see them get a certification, even a certification, maybe 2 years. It doesn't even have to be 4 years, but what sort of, how does that relationship work?
No, it's not necessarily that it has to be with a college or university. It can be somebody that's a private vendor, so like Ozark providing welding training and certification. It could be a specific company that's providing certification towards Lean or Sigma 6. So it does not have to be a college or university, but they do have to be approved by the state of Idaho as a training provider. So, for example, Ozark is nationally, so you're okay with that aspect on that.
How would a company go and find out if they're So
Yeah, for example, some of those of you that are certified public managers, well, you might be a certified public manager, but you're not trained to be a trainer.
Okay.
So that's the differentiation between that. It's just like if somebody's certified to be a project manager, they might be certified themselves, but yet they're not trained to train others to be project managers.
Right. Cool. Yeah, great.
Anyway, I think unless anybody has anything else, we might be towards the end.
Again, highly recommend that you collaborate with our regional business specialists as much as possible in working with us, as they will try and obtain as much information for you, and they're just eager to be out there and helping.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. If you have any questions or would like the presentation, you can email Amanda Ames or Jan Roeser at the Department of Labor. Thank you for attending.
That was easy. Guys didn't have any real